A coding model with open weights just beat Claude's flagship on a real leaderboard. Not a demo, not a vendor slide. Kimi K3 sits above Claude Fable 5 on the front-end code arena, a board judges can't fake. So the headline writes itself. Local already won. It didn't. Not yet. What's sitting on top of that leaderboard right now isn't sitting on anybody's desktop. So here's what's being compared. Front-end Code Arena is a live ranking where separate evaluators judge generated web interfaces head-to-head, not a number a vendor typed into a slide. Kimi K3 from Moonshot AI launched July 16, 2026, and it's currently ahead of Fable 5 on that specific board. On SWE Bench Verified, which is a fixed set of real GitHub issues a model has to resolve and pass, Kimi K3 scores 93, 4% on Val's AI's independent run. That's close to the top of the entire field. Open or closed. GPT 5.6 Sol leads at 96.2. Fable 5 sits at 95.0. So the gap at the very top is under 3 points now. Here's where the local claim falls apart, though. Open weights don't mean it's running on your GPU tonight. Kimi K3's weights aren't even out yet. They're due on Hugging Face around July 27. Every one of those benchmark numbers so far came off Moonshot's hosted API, on their servers, on their hardware. So the model beating Claude on that leaderboard is, this week, exactly as local as Claude is. 0. So what can you actually run tonight? That's the question this whole debate keeps skipping past. Qwen 3 Coder Next is the model people point at when they say local. It's an 80 billion parameter model built as a mixture of experts, which is an architecture where only a slice of the network switches on for each word instead of the whole thing firing at once. Roughly 3 billion of those 80 billion parameters activate per token. That's why it fits on one card instead of a server rack. It's also why it's fast. Speed was never the open weight field's problem. Depth was. Now the score itself, that's where it gets messy. One hardware guide clocked Qwen 3 Coder Next at 58.7% on SWE Bench Verified. A different site, same model, same benchmark name, reports 70.6. Nobody's reconciled that gap publicly. I'm not going to pretend one of them's right. Take both as rough. Either way, it's well behind Claude. Claude Sonnet 5 sits at 85, 2% on the vendor board. Claude Opus 4.8, the one most people actually pay for, comes in at 88.6. So the generous reading of Qwen 3 Coder Next, 70.6, still leaves an 18-point gap to Opus. The pessimistic reading, 58.7, that's a 30-point gap. You don't close that with a firmware update. And a point worth sitting with, DeepSeek V4 Pro Max claims 80.6 on its own vendor benchmark, which would close most of that distance, if you believe a vendor grading its own homework. So here's what it costs just to try. Q4 under K underscore M quantization, a way of shrinking a model's weights down to 4 bits per parameter at a real quality cost. Gets Qwen 3 Coder Next onto a single RTX 5090 with 64 gigabytes of system RAM. Call that $2,500, all in. Step up to DeepSeek V4 Flash, and you're at 284 billion parameters, only 13 billion active. And now you need a Mac Studio with 512 gigabytes of unified memory or dual RTX 6000 ADA cards, just to hold it without spilling to disk. That's a machine that costs more than most people's cars. A thread on r/Alama in early May put 3 of these side by side on the same real repo: Qwen 3.6, Qwen 3 Coder, and DeepSeek Coder. The consensus wasn't which model wins. It was that all 3 still need babysitting on anything past a single file. That's the part nobody's selling a Guff download wants on the box. So the honest fork is this. If you're running agentic coding sessions for hours a day, chewing through hundreds of thousands of tokens, and the API bill is what's keeping you up, Qwen 3 Coder Next on a $5,000 rig probably pays for itself inside a year. If you need the model to be right on a hard multi-file refactor more often than not, you're still paying Anthropic for that, and pretending otherwise just wastes your afternoon. Most people watching this fall into the second bucket. And if you're writing one off scripts and toy projects, none of this changes anything for you. Stick with whatever's free and skip the rest of this. There's a fair complaint from the open weight side worth naming too. OpenAI itself flagged contamination risk across SWE Bench verified, meaning some models may have partially seen the answers during training. SWE Bench Pro, which spreads the same test across more languages behind a lockdown scaffold, is emerging as the more trustworthy version. Nobody, local or closed, has a settled number there yet, and that includes Claude. There's more than one asterisk here, though. First, quantization isn't free. Dropping a model to 4 bits costs real accuracy, and the benchmark numbers you're reading almost never say which precision they ran at. Second, context window on paper and context window that stays coherent aren't the same thing. A model can list 256K tokens and still lose the thread past 40K in practice. Third, and this is the one that gets skipped most, agent tooling matters as much as the base model. Claude code, the scaffold Anthropic ships around its own models, is tuned specifically for how Claude reasons through a repo. Bolt an open model into a generic agent loop and you're throwing away some of what the benchmark measured in the first place. Now the part that matters for a timeline. It's not raw SWE bench anymore. It's which specific job you're asking about. Kimi K3 already tops the front-end code arena ahead of Fable 5 on hosted infrastructure. Glem 5, 2 from Jipu AI, 744 billion parameters with 40 billion active, leads the Artificial Analysis Intelligence Index among open models, and it served at around $1.10 in, $4.10 out per million tokens on Morph. That's haiku tier pricing for a model with real weight behind it. Minimax M3 sits close behind at 80.5 on SWE Bench verified. The frontier isn't one leaderboard falling behind Claude across the board anymore. It's falling in pieces, benchmark by benchmark, and general coding is the last piece standing. So where I land. The specific claim in this title, that local beats Claude right now, is false for anything you can actually run on your own hardware tonight. But the shift underneath it is real. 18 months ago, the open weight field wasn't within 30 points of Claude on anything that mattered. Now it's ahead on front end, within single digits on the intelligence index, and only losing general SW bench because the parameter count you can afford to run at home is still a fraction of what Anthropic serves you over an API. So what to watch? To know if this actually tips. First, whether Kimi K3's open weights land on Hugging Face around July 27 as promised, and whether a quantized version you can run at home holds anywhere near that 93.4. A hosted demo and a 4-bit file on your own card are not the same model, and the gap between them is where most of these predictions quietly die. Second, watch SWE Bench Pro scores once more labs publish against it, because that's the benchmark without the contamination question mark hanging over it, and it'll reset half these numbers when it does. It used to be whether local could ever be in the conversation. Now it's whether the model that wins the leaderboard is even the one you're allowed to download.